The stadium fell silent for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds where 80 million Iranians stopped breathing at the same time. 4 seconds between the loudest roar this team had ever produced and the quietest, most devastating silence in their World Cup history. And in those 4 seconds, a room you will never see, filled with men whose names you will never know, was already drawing a line that would erase the greatest moment in Iranian football history. They called it the laws of the game. But stay with us, because what really happened inside that VAR booth is something FIFA does not want you to examine frame by frame. This was not just a goal. This was a nation's entire World Cup dream condensed into a single touch of the ball. Iran, a team that had clawed, bled, and survived its way onto the world's biggest stage, finally striking back against the weight of history. The scoreboard flickered, the bench emptied, grown men collapsed to their knees in the stands. And then, somewhere in a control room hundreds of meters away, a single screen lit up with the words that would change everything. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what those officials were looking at, exactly why the line was drawn the way it was, and exactly why this decision has become one of the most quietly controversial calls of the entire tournament. If investigations like this are what you came here for, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what we are about to reconstruct frame by frame is something almost no broadcaster dared to show you in full. Here is the central contradiction at the heart of this story. FIFA insists the decision was correct. The technology, they say, does not lie. The rules, they say, were applied exactly as written. And yet, when you slow the footage down, when you study the angles they chose and the angles they ignored, when you understand how the offside line is actually constructed, a very different picture begins to emerge. A picture where the laws of the game were not broken, but were used. Used in a way that found a legal path to erase a goal that, in the eyes of millions, should have stood. Let us go back to the moment itself. The ball is played forward. The Iranian attacker times his run, his shoulder, his hip, his entire body fighting against a defender who is half a step behind. He strikes. The net ripples. The referee, standing closer than anyone in that stadium, points to the center circle. The center circle. That is the universal signal that a goal has been awarded. He saw it. He blew nothing. He gave it. Think about that for a moment. The man with the whistle, the man trained for years to read these exact situations in real time, gave the goal. He did not hesitate. He did not consult. He pointed, and he turned, and he ran back. And then, the voice in his ear arrived. Inside the VAR room, the protocol begins. They are not checking whether the goal looked good. They are not checking whether it felt fair. They are checking for what they call a clear and obvious error. They rewind, they freeze, they zoom. And here is where the investigation becomes uncomfortable. Because the frame they chose, the precise millisecond they identified as the moment the ball left the passer's foot, is itself a judgment call. Not a fact, a judgment. A human being sitting in that booth decided which frame counted as the kick point. Move that selection forward by 1 frame, and the attacker is onside. Move it back by 1 frame, and the attacker is onside. The entire decision hinged on a single frame, chosen by a single official, in a single room, with no public explanation of why that frame, and not the one before it. Now the line is drawn. And this is where the technical review becomes almost surgical in its cruelty. The semi-automated offside system identifies the relevant body parts, the parts that can legally score, and it constructs a line across the pitch. But the line is not a laser. It is a calibrated projection, built from camera angles, from tracking data, from algorithms that estimate position to within a few centimeters. A few centimeters. That is the margin. That is the entire margin between a nation erupting and a nation collapsing. And the line, drawn by software, confirmed by humans, declared that a shoulder, a knee, a sliver of a boot was ahead of the last defender. Not a body length, not a stride, a sliver. And yet, the broadcast cut away before showing you the full picture. The angle they chose to display on the global feed was a tight, almost claustrophobic frame. A wider shot existed. A reverse angle existed. A camera positioned along the goal line existed. But the footage shown to you, the footage shown to 80 million Iranians watching at home, to the players staring at the big screen, to the coaches with their hands on their heads, was the angle that made the decision look the most defensible. Sit with that. The angle that made the decision look the most defensible. But that is just the beginning. Pull back further and the picture grows darker. Because this is not the first time a VAR review has been used to undo a moment that the on-field referee had already blessed. Across this tournament, across the last several tournaments, a pattern has emerged. Goals scored by smaller nations, by underdogs, by teams without the political weight of the giants, are reviewed with a microscope. Goals scored by the favorites are reviewed with a glance. We are not saying that is what happened here. We are saying that is the context in which this happened. And context in football is everything. Now think about the human cost. Think about the Iranian striker who, for the rest of his life, will remember the exact texture of the grass under his knees as he celebrated. He will remember the weight of his teammates piling on top of him. He will remember the sound, and then he will remember the silence. He will remember looking up at the screen and seeing the words that ended it. Think about the goalkeeper at the other end, who had already begun his slow walk back to the center circle, who had already accepted the goal, who had already started preparing mentally for the restart. Think about the fans in the stadium, the ones who had saved for years to be there, the ones who had crossed continents, the ones who had painted their faces and wrapped themselves in flags. They cheered, they wept, they held each other, and then they were told it never happened. Before we go any deeper, if this is the kind of investigation you have been searching for, the kind that refuses to accept the official version at face value, subscribe and turn on notifications right now, because what is coming next is the part FIFA hopes you never sit down and examine closely. Here is the question that nobody in an official capacity will answer. If the margin was so small that it required calibrated software, multiple camera angles, and several minutes of review to determine, can it honestly be called a clear and obvious error? The entire philosophy of VAR, the entire promise made to fans when this technology was introduced, was that it would only intervene when the on-field decision was clearly and obviously wrong. Not marginally wrong, not technically wrong, clearly and obviously wrong. And yet, here we are, watching a goal erased by a margin so thin that the human eye cannot detect it, by a frame selection that could have gone the other way, by a line that depends on which millisecond an algorithm decides to freeze. This is the contradiction. FIFA did not break the rules. FIFA found a legal pathway through the rules to arrive at an outcome. And there is a difference. There is a difference between justice and procedure. There is a difference between fairness and compliance. The laws of the game were followed, but were they served? Look at what was promised when VAR was sold to the world. It was supposed to protect the spirit of the game. It was supposed to correct only the mistakes that everyone could see. It was supposed to be invisible unless something was undeniably wrong. Instead, it has become a forensic tool, a courtroom in a control booth, where the smallest sliver of a shoulder becomes grounds to overturn the loudest moment of a nation's footballing life. That is not what was promised. That is what was delivered. And so we are left with the bigger question. The question that lingers long after the final whistle, long after the players have boarded their plane home, long after the highlight reels have been edited and the tournament has moved on. Did FIFA find justice in that VAR booth? Or did FIFA simply find a legal way to erase the biggest moment of Iran's World Cup? Was the line drawn to protect the integrity of the sport? Or was it drawn because it could be drawn? Because the technology allowed it? Because the rules permitted it? Because no one in that room had the courage to ask whether following the letter of the law was the same as honoring the spirit of it? A goal was scored. A nation celebrated, a line was drawn, a dream was erased, and somewhere in the gap between those four sentences lies a truth that FIFA will never publicly acknowledge. The truth that the most powerful tool in modern football is not the camera, not the algorithm, not the offside line. It is the decision of who gets to choose which frame counts. And that decision, in this match, on this night, for this team, was made by people who will never have to look an Iranian fan in the eye and explain why. So what do you think? Was this VAR call a triumph of technology and fairness? Or was it the moment the laws of the game were quietly weaponized against a team that dared to dream too loudly? Drop your verdict in the comments. Tell us what you saw, what you felt, and what you believe really happened in that booth. If this investigation gave you a perspective the mainstream coverage refused to offer, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay close. Because the next story we are about to uncover is one you will not believe was ever allowed to happen. The goal was given, the goal was taken, and the silence that followed will echo far longer than any whistle ever could.